Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nicci Chats 2. So you may have noticed I have been away for a little while. I took a bit of a break for various reasons, but we are back on a weekly basis, and I am very excited to be with you this week. So for those of you who have not seen the show before or don't know me, my name is Nicci Stewart. I run a company called The Why Effect, and I do these weekly chats with people that I find interesting and that I think have got some cool stuff to share. And it's really fundamentally about shifting your perspective and changing the way you see the world, because that is something that I'm very passionate about. And I believe we could all do with a bit of a refresher every now and then. If you want to get these weekly recordings emailed to you, I do them live on various platforms. Please sign up for my mailing list. I will share the link in the comments. But today I am joined by one of my probably favorite people in the world, the lovely Seanice Lojede, who is the CEO of Blu Flamingo Digital, which is a Pan-African digital agency. So Seanice, thank you for being here and welcome.
Absolutely. Good to see you. It's been a while and welcome back. We missed you.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so sweet of you. So Seanice, one of the things that I absolutely love about you and is it's this ability that you have to be what I call vulnerably honest. Because when people talk about honesty, it's like that kind of, oh yeah, that hair really doesn't work for you. It can be having those hard conversations. But I love that you are very honest about where you are, what is happening, when things aren't going well, and that's very much the kind of topic of our discussion today, is this whole notion of perception versus reality and what's actually happening behind the scenes that people aren't really aware of. But before we kind of delve into that, can you talk to me a little bit, because I think this is going to just contextualize for people and sort of support why you are this way. Could you just talk to me a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are now?
Sure, absolutely, Nicci. And I think that this is such an important topic, especially now when we find ourselves in an age where we've had a great pause with sort of the pandemic. But at the same time, while we were pausing, there was so much of ourselves we could put out there. Digital media just exploded. So you had to adopt a personality. And I think your question about what's led me to where I am today is so interesting because of that saying that you can only ever join the dots looking back. And there have been things that have happened in my life, and you can't explain them until later. You realize that some of your resilience, some of your quirks, etc., have come because of your past. Now, I'm born in Tanzania, educated in the UK, lived in Nigeria, Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda. Stop me when you lose track, because I.
So I'm truly Pan-African.
Yeah, my dad is still a pilot, so we moved around quite a bit. And I had very many experiences, but at the same time, my parents separated when I was quite young. So I went through a little bit of the usual trauma when your parents separate. But I think for me, it was being a firstborn, I took on a lot of that responsibility. And there were times when in that separation, we were quite hard up. So I clearly remember a time when there was nothing to eat in the fridge. And my mom was like, well, we're just going to have to go to bed. And I'm not really understanding the implication of it at the time, but just remembering being really hungry and having to ask the neighbors for food and things that are quite dehumanizing and quite, but at the time you just sort of get through it. Do you know what I mean? This is the thing about when you go through trauma. You don't actually sit there and go, oh, I'm going through trauma. It's much later. And I think when you've hit rock bottom in that kind of way, you just kind of there's really no point about lying about where you are. You kind of get really quickly attuned to, okay, this is where I am. If I can take stock of where I am, I can get to the next point. Because I've also learned very quickly that where you are doesn't determine where you're going to be. That's 100% up to you and how you have a perception of yourself. So I trained as a journalist, like 9 to 5 was a journalist, radio presenter, TV presenter, and then eventually got into quickly realizing that on the African continent, I was not going to become rich by being a radio presenter. And I very much, Nicci, wanted to become rich.
rather than be a radio presenter.
Rather than be like, yes, on the scale of like, like prioritization, I think it's written for radio. And I've always been like, I've loved creating things from a young age. I'm the typical lemonade stand entrepreneur since you were the age of 6, trying to sell whatever you can. But I really love the idea of creation as well, creating stuff. So my sister and I created an agency, and as they say, the rest kind of rolled out. We managed to get a client who then was part of our expansion. So we landed a telco client that helped us expand into other markets. So from Uganda in East Africa, we expanded out into Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, Rwanda, and South Africa, which is now our home base. And currently I'm working on several projects in tandem with several other businesses that I've started and invested in and sit on boards of. So I'm really very, again, that aspect of creation is still very much alive. I'm always constantly trying to create businesses, opportunities for people. I love talking to people. So I think that's why you and I get along so well. You're such a fantastic communicator, so empathetic as well. And I love what you do with this podcast, with reaching people. But that's a little bit about me in a nutshell. Yeah.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. And, I think it's so interesting what you say about trauma, and given where we are at the moment and what we've come out of. And so many people have been so badly affected in various ways by what has happened. And you don't realize when you're in it. It's only when you do actually sit back and reflect and go, hang on, I'm not coping. I'm taking strain with all of this. But, I didn't actually even realize at the time. So that's it can be a bit of a strong mental leap. And we know when people say, well, why didn't you ask for help? It's like, well, I didn't know. I didn't, I was literally just coming and asking for food because I was hungry.
Absolutely.
There was nothing more than that, in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's wonderful. So, Seanice, you are this incredible Pan-African, as you said, and I absolutely love that. And you also obviously are the leader of this organization that spans in a number of countries across Africa. How do you manage that? Because I think, what Blu Flamingo now operates in 5 different African countries.
Mm-hmm.
So, you've got South Africa, you've got Uganda, Rwanda, Kenya, Nigeria. And, for a lot of South Africans, and I will be very honest and say this because it was something that I learned when I started working with you. South Africans tend to live in a bubble. And then there's the rest of Africa. So actually Uganda, Rwanda, Nigeria, Kenya, it's all kind of the same kind of one country, all lumped in the same. And suddenly when I started, and this is also my vulnerable, honest moment, when I started engaging with a lot of your team who are people from one country that are based in another. So you've got Kenyans who are working out of Uganda or Rwanda. And suddenly I became acutely aware of, which sounds so stupid, but the incredibly vast cultural differences between all these different regions, different areas, So how do you manage that as a leader? How do you kind of become that chameleon where you're looking at a country like Rwanda, which is a beautiful country, but still pretty traumatized from its past. Right next door, you've got Uganda, which also, most African countries have complicated histories as we do here as well. But you've got this kind of, it's this constant juggling act. How do you cope with that?
That's a really good question. And I think it's at the heart of perception, which is what we're discussing today. It's that a lot of us go into situations having already preconceived notions, like you said. And when I mentioned one of your greatest qualities, which is empathy, is that with empathy, you have to be able to take yourself and your preconceived notions out of the equation, and then be able to have these people teach you what it means to be Ugandan, what it means to be Rwandese. I must put a caveat that I have the added advantage of obviously having lived in each of those markets. So I do have some experience of what it's like to be in a Ugandan environment. I'm born in Tanzania, but my parents are Ugandan. I've worked in Rwanda. I've worked in Kenya for 5 odd years. My husband is Nigerian. I've lived in Nigeria. So I think sometimes, that question of what makes you uniquely qualified to do this. And perhaps my background through no orchestration of my own has allowed that. But also when you move from place to place, you naturally develop a chameleon ability. You naturally learn to listen and first understand and then act, because your survival depends on it. So I have to let you know that it's not anything I've done uniquely. It's just been a set of circumstances in my life whereby to be able to instinctively live, I've had to develop certain skills. I've been thrown into situations I know nobody, I know no one, I don't even know the language. So I learn to observe before I speak. And I think for anyone who's in a situation where you are an unfamiliar territory or you are trying to break into something that's new, the best thing again is empathy, is curiosity. People love being asked questions. They love when you want to know, even the ones who are quiet and never say anything in meetings. Wink, wink. Nicci knows what I'm talking about. Because of a cultural dissonance where you don't speak until you're spoken to, or the leader has to do speaking and all the leading. That used to take me aback. In a culture like South Africa, it's like we're very aggressive, go, be seen, because that's how you progress. In other cultures, it's the opposite. It's wait to be told by your boss what to do. Don't stick your neck out. If you are seen, it'll get chopped off. And that's a cultural nuance that you have to figure out how to navigate if it's in the best interest of working together as a group. So it's really just being super attuned to the cultural nuances, talking to people. And if you want to change certain things for the better, people need to know why that's important for them. And they will come around, eventually. It takes time, but I've seen a big shift in the business from when we started 11 years ago to how we communicate now, because when people come into a group, you know very well that they will start to act the way the group acts.
Yeah.
So even if my culture is to sit back and be passive, if I'm in a group of people where that is not the norm culturally, then you will find that they start to adapt to speaking out a bit more and realizing that it's okay and that they have a safe environment. And I think that's how you work with such diverse teams. Yeah.
I love what you said there. And there are a couple of things that I'm going to pick up on, because I think I've done, about 20 of these podcasts over 3 or 4 months or 6 months now almost. And I've literally interviewed people from yourself in digital marketing across to human rights, about the war in the Ukraine, and kind of everything, office politics and everything in between. And it's so funny that across all of those vast number of topics, the one consistent theme that comes out, and I feel like I'm saying this every single time, is this notion of curiosity and how it actually feeds into your ability to empathize, your ability to listen, it's just this: ask people questions, talk to them, get to know them, be curious, and I'm actually beginning to think that curiosity is the secret to life. And the more we embrace it, the better.
Yeah, I didn't kill the cat. It saved the cat in this.
Saved the cat. Absolutely.
But what you're saying is so true, Nicci, because if you think about it, right, all of us from a young age, from the time we're brought into this world, what do we want to see? What do we want to have happen to us? We want to be seen, to be understood, to be heard, to be recognized, even from our parents. After food and I guess water, that's the fundamental thing. Do you see me for me? Do you hear me for me? Do you understand me for me? And as a digital marketer, we work in the knowledge economy. I'm not putting caps on tubes of toothpaste. I have to work through people. There is no other way. So if my teammate is having a terrible day, there goes productivity. So it's in my best interest to try and bridge that gap of understanding between us. And you're right, because I think the other thing about curiosity that I've learned is that it removes bias very quickly. Because you come at it from a place of, I don't know. That's why I'm curious. I'm curious, why does your hair fall in that way? As opposed to thinking, oh, she probably puts a lot of mousse and her hair falls that way.
Because it's impossible.
It looks good though.
That's why.
And I think that, again, that curiosity is also what makes us all human. It stops the whole, you're white, I'm black, you're polka dotted with white stripes, whatever it is. So it takes away the differences and just says, look, all of us have an innate curiosity about why the world is the way it is and why it works. And once you open that up, like that child, you can see people, you can hear them who they are. than assuming things. And it works very well in leadership as well, because before you assume the person didn't send the report because they're, I don't know, useless, or they're doing things or whatever, you seek to understand, like, Nicci, I noticed you didn't send the report. Is there a reason why? And you might be taken aback by some of the reasons that might even be of your own making. You didn't brief properly. You actually didn't set a timeline. We're so scattered that we do so many things at the same time that we forget small things do slip through the cracks. So before you blame someone else, you realize perhaps part of it was of your making. And that, I found, brings people closer together when they know that you want to know, not just to blame, right? And in a world where we're all working remotely, we need that skill now more than ever.
Absolutely. And I mean, there was something else that you said that I kind of want to get back to is, I mean, you actually used the phrase, why it's important for them. And it's something that I've seen a lot of people in your position where you do have a number of people under you that you are managing lose focus in that you are the leader of this organization. The finances are your responsibility. It's a big part of what you have to do. It's a big stressor. We know this, but almost become very outwardly focused and forget that actually you've got this group of people who are enabling this environment that you're in, and almost forget that these are your most important people. They are supposed to look after your clients. So you must need to be focusing inwardly. They focus out rather than the other way around.
Yeah. And that's such a valuable point, because when my sister and I started the business, one of our primary motivators, for me anyway, was I had worked in such toxic environments. And I said, there's got to be another way, the folly of youth, hey? Because you realize that toxic environments don't create themselves, number one, and that it's actually very complex and very difficult to create an environment that isn't toxic, because the one thing you can never bet on is human behavior.
Yeah,
you can try as much as you can, and we do, and it's been a lot of learning for myself as well. I always say that entrepreneurship is a self discovery and a self improvement tool masquerading as a business, because that's really you will never learn more about yourself than you will running a business. And balancing all these conflicting ideas sometimes. For example, I'll give you one conflicting idea. Listen to what people do rather than what they say. That already is such a leap mentally, because we're really tuned to see what's in front of us, what people say, how they look, how they act, how they make us feel, how they treat us, that we put what they do secondary. But as a business owner, you have to very quickly learn to make the mental leap that it doesn't matter what this person is saying. I need to kind of look at the output. And that is a tough one if at the same time you're juggling empathy. Do you see now how the whole thing is just becoming more and more complicated?
Yeah, absolutely.
I have empathy that you might be going through something personal, but I also have a responsibility to the 60 odd people I'm employing, because if your productivity goes down, then they're affected. So how do you balance all these things and still maintain your sanity? That requires quite a bit of self-awareness. And you investing a lot of time in psychology and understanding yourself and other people. Because leadership, I think, is even less about giving directives and keeping an eye on the money. It is all those things, but it's more about understanding human behavior and what makes people tick, and how to lead, how to get things done through people. Because that's the toughest thing. It's like, I want to get to this mountain, but I've got to convince these guys to come with me. And it's not just about money. Sure, money is an exchange, but there's always something more that drives a person to come and give their best. And that's what you need to try and figure out, especially if you're in a service-oriented business. I think it might be easier if you're like manufacturing or whatever, and I'm not diminishing those verticals in any way. I'm just saying that when you are relying on people to come and give you their best innately, rather than just sort of a sort of rote task that requires no application necessarily of your own initiative to a large degree, it becomes more important to be invested in someone's outcome, not just your own. Ultimately, yeah.
And you touch on something there, just from a very practical point of view, as to why it is so difficult to actually grow a business and to scale it, because there are all these factors that you have to consider, where you have to be this leader who needs to show up and balance all of this and be empathetic but still be firm, curious, and then still manage the practical side of the business, the finances, the potentially the clients, all of those different areas. So it becomes a massive juggling act. And on top of this, I mean, I just have to put this out there as well. Seanice has also got 3 children. She's also got and a husband, an entire household that is being managed kind of behind the scenes almost. And at some point then when people go, you need to focus on self-care, it's like, oh really?
Where? What time?
Self-care is for childless people.
Oh, it's funny, but it's true. My ribs hurt right now. It's such a, I struggled with this, and I'm going to be very, very vulnerable and say that I'm still figuring it out. And show me a person who's figured it out, and believe you me, I'll give them the Nobel Prize, because I'll
show you a liar.
Right?
Sorry to interrupt you.
Absolutely, because I have days when I do really well and days when I do so badly, and days that are in between and middling to best. The other day I called my sister, just literally about to have a breakdown, because I was like, I thought that I had it all in control, and that I was doing deep work and putting aside 4 hours of my day to do intense, because again, now that we're so social media and all of these things, our attention is so fragmented. We don't give enough time for deep work, the kind of meaningful work that actually creates things. Yes. And every time I look at, for example, your podcast posts, I can tell you've put a lot of research into meeting the person. You've put a lot of thought into what you're going to discuss. How easy it is to just pick up the phone and say, hey, let's have a chat. Just talk about whatever comes, right? Without thinking deeply before we engage. And the more fragmented our society is becoming, the more valuable this deep work is. So I was having a breakdown with my sister, because I was like, I had purposed to do like 6 hours of deep work every week, and I was barely managing 30 minutes. And I was so disappointed in myself, because I can be very hard on myself. And my background probably will give you some psychological insight as to why I'm so hard on myself. Because having gone through a lot of hardship, you realize you're probably the only person you can depend on, so you pile all this pressure on. But to your point of how do you kind of juggle all of these demands, especially as a leader, it's very important to do the work on yourself first. If you want to get to really high points of leadership, you have to understand what you're good at, what you're not good at. And this is where leading through people becomes important. I am terrible at letting people go, at just saying, you know what, I'm getting better at it, but to say we're not a good fit, I think you could do better elsewhere. So you have to learn that there will be people who are good at that. That's what you're good at. And your job is to figure out a way to find these people, to bring them into your business, to leverage them, because the reason you're a leader is because you have certain God-given abilities to lead. You are perhaps more risk. You have a bigger appetite for risk than most. You have more drive than most. You wake up and you motivate yourself. So there are qualities that will come naturally as a leader. But then it also means maybe you're not that patient. Maybe you're a bit quick. I tend to see the end before I don't see the steps in between. I'm like, that's somebody else's problem. Like, we're going there. And I don't see all the little things in the middle that have to be done. I need someone a bit more strategic, a bit more to be by my side. But no one can ever do that work for you. And you will never, ever get to a point where you can leverage all your talents if you don't spend enough time knowing all the areas that you need support in and getting people who are good at that to do that for you. And that is a leader's biggest responsibility, is find the right team and then leveraging their best talents. So my time is not well spent in trying to do things I'm not really good at or passionate about. But I will have some grunt work. I'm not saying leaders should only do the stuff they enjoy. There will be grunt work. But ultimately, I've started to take into consideration where my time serves the highest value. So if an hour of my time speaking to you feeds my need to give back, to reach people, that's something I've purposed to do, to share my experience, to help someone. So I know fully well this hour is well spent. It's an hour I've prepared for, I'm looking forward to, I'm engaged. After this, I will do something else. But there's so many things that I used to do with my time that I could train someone else to do, and they could do probably a better job because they're better qualified. So the long answer to your question is find a team, a really good team, and work with them so that each of you can bring your highest selves to what you're doing. And that's the only way to juggle doing things. Because I run 5 markets, like you said, but I also run 3 other businesses that have nothing to do with the 5 markets. Plus, I sit on 2 boards. Like you said, I have kids, I have family, people that I love, and I've also got to take time out for myself to meditate. Things. So it is a lot. I'm not going to say it's not a lot. And that's why you will have good days and bad days. But in between, it's really just about being able to take stock. And the only thing I keep going back to is know thyself. Spend time knowing that is your numero uno job. Because if you don't do that, you cannot be effective to anybody or any other thing. Yeah.
Because that was actually, as you were speaking, I was thinking you keep getting back to that.
Yeah.
Know yourself. Know yourself. Know yourself. Yeah. So in all of this overachieverishness, we have to know.
To keep going back to what is it about myself? Because I got to a point in my business and I said, why am I not scaling? Like, why do I feel like I've hit this plateau? Ceiling, exactly. And it was because of that, because your business can never grow further than you. So you've got to be expanding all the time, expanding what your comfort zone is, expanding what you know how to do. If you're the kind of person who's afraid to ask for help, you're not going to go far as an entrepreneur, because literally all it is all the time is asking for help. You're asking people's money, you're asking people's time, you're all the time. Guys are like, you're not paying me enough. I know, but you for staying anyway. It's just you're always asking. And that was hard for me, very, very hard for me. It's one of the areas that I struggle with the most. And, as we're talking about the topic, which is perception, right, versus reality, people look at me and go like, oh, she's a go-getter, she's out there, not realizing that actually it takes a lot. I can be out there, that's fine. I'm quite an gregarious person, generally. Asking people for stuff, I never feel valuable enough. I never feel I'm worthy of taking up space or time. So I've always got to find a way to make it worth the other person's time. I'm a quid pro quo person. Like, you tell me, I'll do this for you just because you deserve it. I'll be like, what's the catch? Because life never threw me it never gave me any breaks, so to speak, right? Never gave me opportunities where I could feel comfortable and say, just because I exist, I have value. So I've had to become my own parent, if that makes sense, and my own teacher. And it's hard. It's hard. Every time, I'm talking to myself and saying, you're worth being in this room. You matter. And that's all going on in the background, but not enough of us talk about this imposter syndrome. Not enough of us talk about the difference between the reality and the perception people have of us. And I think the more we talk about it, the more liberated we become. The less hold power it has over us, and the more people feel like I'm normal for feeling like this and I can get over it. And I think that's so important for people to feel empowered enough to really change their reality or whatever life threw at them that made them feel like they weren't valuable enough.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting what you say about asking for help, because I mean, you and I do come from very different backgrounds. I grew up in a white family in apartheid South Africa. And by virtue of the fact that I was white or am white, was
still are, yes.
I haven't recently started identifying.
No, you haven't. Yes, okay.
Sorry, but that was a very privileged. It was a privileged upbringing, very middle class upbringing, and I have exactly the same problem as you about asking for help. I broke my ankle. I was in a cast on crutches a few years ago, living on my own at the time. And my brother and sister-in-law came around to visit me. And my brother is this big 6'3" person, and he said to me, how are you going to shower? So I said, no, it's fine. I've got plastic chairs outside, garden chairs. I'll just put one in the shower. And he said, oh, well, let me do it now for you. And I was like, no, it's fine. I'll do it myself.
Oh, my goodness.
I had just come out of hospital. This was because I had to have like 3 hours of surgery to have plates and things put in my ankle. This was on the Sunday night. And he just looked at me and he went, really?
Are you kidding?
And he walked. And that is the extent of this inability that I didn't want to, and it's exactly as you say, waste my brother's time. It took him 30 seconds, actually it took him a lot longer because the door of the shower was slightly narrower than I thought. So it was actually really difficult to get, we had to maneuver it in. And I was going to do that on my own.
Unbelievable. Just because I feel I don't need to impose. But
and this is my brother.
And like,
it's not even like
it's
a security guard in my car. It's my brother.
Absolutely. That's such a brilliant example that illustrates exactly what I'm talking about. But when you say it now, it seems so ludicrous, right? But in that moment, we've internalized it so much that it seems perfectly normal.
Oh, exactly. And the funny thing is, if the roles were reversed and he had the broken leg, I would have bent over backwards to get the damn garden chair. So it's not like I don't expect these things. I wouldn't do them for other people.
Absolutely.
And I think it's so interesting what you say about it does become this weird quid pro quo because why would you just want to help me? Where's the catch?
Yes, absolutely. And what I've learned that's been so interesting as well when we now try to bridge the personal and the professional is that it becomes the same, the saying, everywhere you go, there you are. Sometimes we have this idea that we can be someone different at work and someone different at home. And actually nothing could be further from the truth, because this same feeling of inadequacy, don't want to bother anyone, I'll do the most, it now holds you back from growing the business, because then it becomes, oh, I wouldn't bother anyone to ask for capital, right? I wouldn't bother anyone to ask if they would take a share in my company because I can't afford to pay them full rate, but just come in and really grow the business with me, and they will get their value later on, because you're just thinking, I cannot ask for more. And that perception you have of a lack of value now plays itself out in ways that are so monumental in stopping you from truly achieving your goals and dreams. And that's why, again, broken record, know thyself. It goes back to really understanding that your drivers, what things could be holding you back, and figuring out how to improve on those things. Because here's the thing, right? It's not that anyone's asking you to change who you are. It's actually we're asking you to become who you really are. Because when you have all these layers, how did they get there? It's either situations that we went through that made us feel like we're not enough. It's either something we read or were told or were heard that actually wasn't true. So there's a whole, for most people, when you rock into your 30s, you realize you have to unlearn so many things that were not true. First of all, nobody knows what the heck they are doing. Not a government, not a huge company, and you're in charge of this thing. This thing through space. Can I please talk to the manager? And you have to realize that you've got to form your own perception of reality. And that is a mind-boggling thing to think about, that everything we see has been fabricated by somebody. And if you don't quickly start to think, what do I want the world to mean? What do I want my work to mean? What do I want productivity? What do I want satisfaction? All these things, what do they actually mean to me? Then comes the big question, wait a minute, who am I? If I strip all the societal expectations, cultural implications, and everything, all the labels that I've come to wear like a coat over time that gives me a sense of identity. But what's the real me? Who's the real me? And the reason why this, it might sound airy-fairy, but the reason why this is so critical for us to discover now is because we are entering a knowledge economy, right? We are entering an era where machines can do so much of the work for us. So what's left, right? It's going to be that thing that we can bring into workforces that cannot be replicated by a machine. And you cannot bring that if you don't know who you are, if you don't know what your biggest value is. And that for me is bottom line stuff. It's not soft stuff. It's stuff that drives profit. It's stuff that drives meaning. It's stuff that drives innovation, creativity, and us actually putting stuff into the world that will make the world a better place. And so it is something that that's good for the bottom line at the end of the day.
I love that explanation, that because, so many people, and for some reason, these skills have been categorized as soft skills. So it
Right.
becomes, you've got your hard skills, Shalice, you can set up a social media advertising campaign, you can build a website, you can analyze data, you can do this. And that's the hard stuff. So that's like the good stuff. And then
Yeah.
there's the soft stuff, and I love that you said that this literally does feed into the bottom line. And I think this is something that we miss, that, this is and it's almost, the hard skills are actually easy to learn, because
Yes.
the hard skills become, as weird as it's, like, the hard skills are a checkbox exercise. I do this, then I do that, then I do. Whereas when you're looking at this going, am I being a control freak because I'm too scared to ask for help? And every entrepreneur I've met, whether you a solopreneur like me, or the owner of it, or managing a team of 50 people, in
Yeah.
excess of 50 people, we all control freaks.
Yeah.
Is it because I'm too afraid to ask for help? Is it because I am, suddenly that's not a checkbox exercise, and that's
Absolutely.
not a linear process. You don't go from there to there to it's kind of like this, and it's a much more messy process.
Absolutely. And I love what you said, because it's also the dichotomy of characteristics. So people say you're strong, but it's got another side to that, right? It means you might have internalized your strength so much that you feel vulnerability is a weakness.
Yeah.
People say you are structured, and then you have no room for flexibility in your life,
Mm.
right? So every good quality that we have that helps us be entrepreneurs, be leaders, be go-getters, we have to realize that there's a price we pay for that. And learning to balance that, for me, is what leadership is, and entrepreneurship has taught me, is that at any one point you are balancing opposing things. You are
Mm.
balancing profit and people. You are balancing processes and innovation, because those
Yeah.
things are in direct competition to each other,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Money doesn't exactly enjoy empathy sometimes. It's like, yeah, bottom line, bottom
Neither
line,
does
bottom
the bank.
Oh, neither right? But then progress
Mm.
and discovering and innovation and new stuff does value that. So how
Mm.
do you balance the two, right? And that's where you have to be so clear about who you are, what's important to you, because it then makes it easy for you to make certain decisions.
Mm.
That clarity you have of self, and just being really aware that um, it would be great to live in a world where everything is black and white, but we don't. And that's the beauty, again, of being human, is that life, otherwise life would be very boring, I suspect. So it's this constant growth, right? Someone, my son who's 7 years old, asks me all the time, ad nauseum, Mom, what's the meaning of life?
Ooh.
I'm pretty sure I gave birth to like some sort of, he's like
He's going to be a philosopher.
that's what I was going to say. He's a reincarnation of like Plato, right? He's
Yeah.
constantly asking me the meaning of life, such that I had to actually think and start asking myself, what is the meaning of life? And through many, and this means it's different to different people, right? But from a very personal basis, for me, it's two words: joyful expansion. Because if you think about it, yeah, we've been put on this world for one thing, to expand. From the time you grow, you're learning new things, right? You're learning how to walk, you're learning how to run, you're learning how to read.
Mm.
So it means that from the time you're born, you're constantly doing this. You're expanding. It doesn't stop when you become a leader. It's not like, oh, Nicci, you're now COO. Damn,
Check.
you're expanded. Check.
Mm.
You're still
You're
going to learn.
expanded.
You're expanded.
You must remember that you are expanded.
Well done. You're still in that time when you're still learning how to be a better CEO today, tomorrow. But
Mm.
somehow we don't allow for that. So we don't allow people to make mistakes and become better leaders. I mean, I'm not definitely the leader I was when I started my business. I hope not, because that would be tragic. I mean, I look at some of the emails I sent 10 years ago, like, what was I doing?
Cringe. Mm.
Yeah, and the other part of that is the joyful part, because life is hard. It can be hard. Terrible things happen. You talked about how difficult COVID has been for so many people. That means the point of life is to figure out how to go through all of this with joy, never losing your joy, It doesn't mean you won't have days when you cry your eyes out. But I think the purpose is to figure out a way to, even in our sadness, to have a part of that that reminds us that a bad day does not make a bad life. That is a purpose you're here for, and that allows you to keep expanding. Because if you look at a person who has stopped expanding, you can see for yourself that this is an abhorrence to nature. Look at anyone who grows old and retires and feels like their life is over. They die within years because they've stopped expanding. So I feel like, that if we bring that sort of culture into the workplace, where we understand how to really leverage the human side of ourselves, that it'll be so good for business and for making money and profit in the right ways that are sustainable. A lot of the way we work is not sustainable. Toxic environments are not sustainable. Your turnover will be like that. It's just not good business sense, right? Building small, tiny little houses with no gardens is not sustainable. People can't enjoy themselves. They can't have a garden. It doesn't actually make business sense over time, right? We think about the profit and the bottom line all the time. But until we can, you remember I talked about that tightrope, until we can learn to balance the very hard aspects of business with the very human aspects of business, we won't be prepared for what's to come, because life as we know it has changed. Business as we know it has changed. Industrialization, that was the old age. Now we're in a different kind of economy with, I hate the term, but Gen Z, who is asking, by the way, for a totally different reality. Yeah.
Absolutely. And thank goodness.
And thank goodness. Absolutely.
So there are two things that I just want to pick up on there. Firstly is, have you read the Book of Joy?
You know what? I have not.
I'm going to get you a copy. That was the first one. And I'm going to gift that to you because it is exactly what you're talking about. Joy in. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the book, it was written by Douglas Abrams, who transcribed, well, loosely transcribed conversations between Bishop Desmond Tutu and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And they produced the book, where he published this book, The Book of Joy. And it is about, I mean, as you can imagine, these are two men who've been through very difficult times and managed to maintain joy. So it's very much what you're saying. So I'm going to gift that to you. And then the second thing that I want to pick up on is this notion that life is transient. I mean, it's constantly changing. I'm looking at my parents who are in their late 70s, and I'm pretty sure they had a very clear idea of what their retirement would look like and how it would work. And for various reasons, it hasn't turned out that way. And now I'm looking at my dad, who is 78 and is living on his own for the first time in his life. So his whole life has shifted in a way that he probably never imagined it ever would. And I've seen that happening over and over again with different people under different circumstances. And I love that it almost creates this opportunity that we can constantly reinvent ourselves. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine once, and he said to me, I want to teach my children. We were talking about sports people. And I was quite anti-sports people as a profession, purely because your career can end at any time. You can be considered washed up in your early 30s, possibly mid-30s if you are lucky. And, sort of, is this really viable for people? And how does this work? And his response was, well, actually, I want to teach my children that you can reinvent yourself at the age of 45. And I suddenly thought, wow, I'd never actually thought of it that way. And, we do get stuck in this ageist society where if you're not the CEO of a unicorn company at the age of 29, well, thanks, bye. In fact, it's probably now 25. Yeah, what have you done? Like, you've had 29 years, like underachiever, so and it was a really big shift for me. And I've gone back to that line so many times, and I now actually actively find myself looking for people who have reinvented themselves in their mid-40s, probably because I'm in my mid-40s now. But Seanice, I want to you've spoken a lot about imposter syndrome, and it's something that, I'm a big fan of talking about. But one of the things I do, or one of the other things, and so many things that I love about you, is this, your your attitude towards failure and how it, I mean, I don't even know if you use the word failure, but, so yeah, just talk to me about that.
Yeah. Failure. So when I was younger, my dad used to say two things. One thing, you're never above doing anything, right? So he would tell me sweeping the floors, standing, selling stuff on the street. There's never any job that you're better than. And the second thing was just his attitude to failure. He always told me, did you try? And did you give it your best? And it doesn't seem profound when I say it, right? Maybe, possibly lots of parents do this with their kids, and I encourage you to continue doing this. But my husband really did something that I found life-changing. At dinner, he would say, okay, how have you failed today? And I thought that was a bit odd. So I asked him, why do you ask the kids that? And he said, well, I want to normalize failure. They will fail so many times in their life, and let's talk about it. Let's talk about what it taught them. Let's actually take that word and stop it. In many books call it the F word, right? Which I think is brilliant because it's like it has become like a swear word, like, oh, you failed. And I've failed many times in my life. At some point, I had a salon, and I was so excited. I'm like, oh, well, I mean, my hair should say everything. I should not own a salon. And I was so excited, and I spent a lot of money and made it look really fancy. And I completely forgot about that first business principle: location, location, location. It was very difficult to find, even though it was very beautiful. So we had maybe one client a month. But long story short, like that failure taught me so much. I call it my MBA, like because it was really like a business lesson. Like
your FMBA.
My FMBA. Precisely. And failure has been studied by so many people. There's so much shame around it. There's so much tied into our own sense of worth. Because if I fail, it's not that the project failed, you see. It is that I, as a human being, have some sort of defect. Something is wrong with me. I am not able to perform in a certain way. And therefore, I am not deserving of love. Nicci, don't even look at me. I don't deserve your attention because I failed. And that, for me, is what we need to completely disassociate ourselves from. And it starts in the home. When your child fails at school, how do you react? If they've not done really well at a certain thing, what do you tell them? And remember, as a parent, what I've learned is you cannot lie to children. What you believe,
they see it. They know.
I don't know why the FBI doesn't employ children. Honestly. You cannot get past these buggers. Like what you believe, they will go straight to the heart of what you believe, not what you say. So if you truly have internalized failure as a bad thing, even if you say it's okay, you failed, it's fine. Even if you say it from a surface level, it never really actually has that vibrational intent, right? So I think for a lot of us, we need to actually sit and re-educate ourselves. What I talked about in our 30s, this is one of the big things when you get to 30, you need to re-educate yourself and reparent yourself, is this fear of failure. And being okay with making mistakes and knowing that those mistakes are not permanent, they're not a reflection of you, but that's how you learn. And you're right. I typically I don't use the word failure. I don't even think I use the word problems. Nicci used to hate this about me. I used to say, oh, that's an opportunity. And she's like, oh God,
here we go again.
Exactly. All things opportunities and then everything's fine. And I'm like, what? And it's this idea of going from failure to failure without a lack of enthusiasm in between. Because I truly believe that unlike other creatures, our superpower is the ability to create our reality. And this is why I love this topic of perception versus reality. Because if someone tells me, oh, you just put your head in the sand and you make everything seem like it's okay. Yeah, because why would I want to live in a world where that's not possible? I would love to put my head in the sand all the time and be like, everything's okay. Because 9 times out of 10, the things you fear never come to pass. Take an honest look at your life. All the things you fear, and tell me how many of them actually came true. And we waste a lot of time on that. So it doesn't mean that I don't have fears. I do. It doesn't mean that when I fail, I don't feel a certain way. I do. But over the years, I've become a lot more comfortable with this thing called failure, a lot more comfortable, because I always tell myself, if I had an option to sit on my deathbed and say, I tried everything and it failed, or to say I was too scared to even try, do you know what? I'd much rather have tried and failed than to think that I didn't try at all. And after the sting of failure has kind of that nice smell of failure is wafted away, you kind of realize it's actually not that bad. Like, I can talk about it, I can laugh about it, I can say what I want about it, and it's like a muscle. The more you do it, the easier it gets, and that's really my perception and philosophy on failure. It's only what you make of it. Like, people say me, oh, how much money did you lose in that salon? And I'm like, lots. Like, probably be driving a Lamborghini right about now, but I do not regret it. And giving it that, being able to talk about it freely, openly, allows other people to also start to destigmatize it a bit. And then you start to normalize it in your company as well. And here's the funny thing. We think that if we normalize failure in our companies, that people will be failing all the time. Do you know that doesn't happen? It actually doesn't. It just allows people to feel free to make mistakes. And guess what? They bounce back so much harder. And they have more energy. And because that's the thing, we have so many preconceived notions about what something will mean. So, if my people see me as someone who accepts failure, oh, we're going to be failing our clients all the time, left, right, and center. But actually, it's not what happens. I'll give you another small example. Tell your kids they can have alcohol and see what happens. They'll taste it, go like, ooh, that sucks, never mind. Tell them they can't have alcohol and see what happens. So a lot of life are kind of upside down, a bit like Alice in Wonderland. You have to go down that rabbit hole and experiment with certain things to really understand that human nature is such that if you allow people freedom, 9 times out of 10, they actually will deliver, right? There'll be the odd person. I'm not saying you won't have people take advantage. And that's why we have guardrails. Those are important too. But treating people the way you want to be treated, I think, is a good rule of thumb. And if you want the freedom to fail and experiment and not be chastised for it, chances are your team wants the same thing.
I love that. And I think we're almost at an hour. So I think that's a great place to end off on. And Seanice, do you have any kind of final thoughts or something, some nuggets? Oh, you've got so many that you want to share with with people.
It's hard to know. We've talked about so much, and I think you've touched on what I love about our session is that you've touched on things that aren't often talked about. And I think that's so important. Now, that's the value and gift. You have a beautiful gift that you bring to the world that only you can do. And I'm really grateful for you. So I know this is not much of a last nugget. It is appreciation of this session. I think maybe the only last thing I can say or leave is values. I think values they've been paid so much lip service. It's almost like what are your values? We've kind of, but like most things that are either stereotyped or become pop culture, there's a reason they become pop culture, is because they are effective, and we need to return to why they're effective. And I think that now more than ever, we need to lead from a place of values, because as a leader, I possibly make 100 to 200 decisions a day, from the very minuscule to the very big. And within my work context, maybe half of those are in my work context, right? Others are just things like what kind of lipstick to wear. But I think because you're constantly, as a leader, going to be making decisions that impact people, that impact businesses, that impact countries, economies, I think one of the things we need to be very clear on is our values, because values help you very clearly to determine if this is the right decision or not. So if one of your values is authenticity, and someone comes to you and wants to do something that makes you feel like you're not being your authentic self, you'll clearly know, that's not for me, but thank you very much. And it's not something we talk about a lot, but as a leader, as we talk about sort of perception versus reality, and how to know what's for you in this whole thing of perception versus reality, you really need to be very clear on what your values are. And use those almost as a barometer for every decision you make. How does this align to my value? Because one of my values is authenticity, as you probably picked up. The other one is growth, as you probably picked up. And you can see that even as I speak, a lot of my values will come out because I've internalized them. They're now a part of me. So if something doesn't grow me, I'll say no to it, because I just feel like it doesn't align with myself. So this show, it grew me. I learned things from you. I had a chance to reflect, hopefully to share. And there's that expansion, so it grows you. So I think that perhaps would be the only thing I would leave with your audience, is to just take a few minutes and really think, have I done that exercise where I've kind of really understood what my values are and am I living them day to day?
Oh, Seanice, thank you so much. That's really that is very valuable. And as you know, I love chatting to you, and I could really keep you here all day. Whenever I get a chance to talk to Seanice, like I'm hogging this, I'm like becoming selfish about it, and I'm going to hang on to it. But thank you so much for your time and your wisdom, and I've loved talking to you as I always do, and you've just shared so many wonderful things. So thank you for being here and for taking the time to chat to me.
Thank you, Nicci. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody who's joined us live, or if you're watching this as a recording. Thank you so much for being here. And I just want to say to everybody, go forth and fail. And I will see you all next week. Have a wonderful weekend and take care and be safe. Bye-bye.